Uh, okay, so we're gonna talk tactile things this morning. We're gonna talk about architecture. We're gonna talk about design. I'll give you a little background, as Mark and Matt have done. I've been working as an architect since 1982. I graduated from my master's program in 1982. Before that, I was an English Lit major. I got an undergraduate degree just in case this architecture thing didn't pan out, and I ended up getting an architecture degree and then working crazy hours, so I feel like I've got a career and a half. I spent 21 years of that in doing something else. I was involved a lot in performing arts work. That was my design background, was performing arts. And I did a fair number of churches. Living in Utah as a Christian architect, there's not too many choices for believing architects to come in and align themselves with the few Christian churches that there are in those communities. You know, we're in an LDS culture, and so I would get tapped on the shoulder to do those projects, and I had probably worked on 15 or 20 different projects and screwed most of them up, honestly. Not for, negligence or lack of diligence, but the way that I was trained to do buildings was very different. Was that architecture for me was sold as a career path where I was to emphasize my portfolio. I was to think of architecture as one of the fine arts, and the process was really not about you and your ministry. It was about me and my portfolio, and it was about me trying to avoid the kinds of disastrous decisions that clients can make that would affect my portfolio in a negative way. It's just the mindset of architects coming out of school. So somewhere along the path in those 21 years, I was taught how to do buildings by people who were learning how to do buildings themselves in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and then they passed that information on to me and taught me how to design the same inflexible, fortress-like buildings for ministry that they had, and later realized that building needed to go in a different direction for ministry because ministry is constantly on the shift. It's constantly changing. The kinds of things that I've learned over my career, I would never design a building. I still go into the church that I accepted Christ in, a church out in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I still wince about some of the stupid decisions that I made at that time. So I've learned some things, and now, 42 years into my career, I want to be able to pass that along and still continue to learn, by the way. What's amazing about my career path is that I get to work with people that are really successful at ministry. Otherwise, they wouldn't need buildings. And they're able to pass along to me what works for them and what doesn't work for them. So as long as we're, continually trying to learn, and I emphasize that to our interns and our younger architects coming in. I referred to one of our architects as a young man who's joined our firm, and then I realized he's been with us for 17 years. But I continue to pass on to them. Think about the process of continually learning how to do things, continually absorbing what works, what doesn't work, and be ready to make the shift and make the change. And that's one thing I've really learned about this process. So I'm going to get into the nuts and bolts about that, how that happens. I want to introduce you, though, to Adrian Ben, who has been with us for 22 years. Adrian is one of the bright stars in our company that not just believes in the power of doing good design and the follow-through that it takes to be diligent about that, but he has a heart for ministry. Adrian has planted a church. He's acted as a pastor while he was serving as an architect in our firm full-time up in Brigham City, Utah. Brigham City, Utah is one of the bastions of the LDS culture. And so Adrian introduced a lot of things in that little short clip about our process that I'm going to expand on this morning. He talked about the charrette process, which I'll describe what that is in our second session. He talks about the small role that we play in bringing these buildings online to serve as tools. I'll emphasize and underline again what Matt said, that we really do think of these buildings as tools and not as monuments to a pastor or to a building committee or to a donor or to a church. That's not the purpose of these buildings. And yet I was trained in that these buildings are monuments to the architect, that this is my embodiment of my work, this is my identity. And I've had to give all that up and set that to the sidelines and think differently about that now. So we're going to spend a few minutes, though, first talking about probably my favorite subject, which is design. I am 66 years old. I still go out about 15 or 20 times a year and spend 3 or 4 days with organizations to help design their building conceptually. And so I'll get into that conceptual process, but I want to talk a little bit about key design trends. And I'm a little tentative to use that word trend, because I don't think we want to find ourselves chasing trends. So I'm not sure I could come up with a better word, but there are things that come into ministry that are just better ways of doing things that stick and stay. And there are things that come into ministry that are part of our culture that kind of sweep through and then disappear. A good example of those, a trend that came and went, was suddenly it became really cool to have pallet wood walls. You've seen the pallet wood walls in buildings? Not just churches, but Starbucks and all the current culturally appropriate places, they would put up a pallet wood wall. And it came and it was cool, and then it disappeared. It went. Other kinds of trends that happen, they come, they go, and they're gone. Color is a trend. Color has been bred into our culture to come in, be in vogue, and then be really out of vogue later on. I was doing buildings in 2009 that were really cool if you had pumpkin orange and lime green in the same building. But by 2016, pumpkin orange and lime green, out, gone. Ice blue, whatever other colors were in there. And that's because people in our culture are coming up with these ideas that are infused into our retail churn. They influence the kind of clothing that we buy, the kinds of products that we buy. And they want you to give up on that product or that shirt or that blouse. Why? Because it's not cool anymore. It's the wrong color, right? We need the current colors. So I go to the thrift store and just buy last year's colors, and I get really good deals. And so, well, anyway, I think that we've got to be careful about chasing trends. But there are some things that come into ministry that are really worth tracking and figuring out, is this something that makes sense for us? Is this going to be a permanent inclusion into the way that we minister to our communities? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about those this morning. We're going to talk about community-centered design, the importance of that. I'll give some interesting thoughts on the evolution of how this came about. We're going to talk about merging indoor and outdoor space and the value of that. We'll talk about the value of adaptive reuse. We believe that oftentimes if you can find an existing building, and not all buildings are good for this, but if you can find one that is, you can get a big jump on your project that way instead of going to build a new building, and largely because of the cost of developing site improvements. Site improvements in my career have gone from 15% to 50% or more of the cost of a total project. The governments infuse themselves into water management and water storage and so forth, and that's expensive. So, especially in Texas, especially around Houston, by the way. That hurricane that came through, was that Harvey 2 years ago or 3 years ago? That completely changed the way land is used around the Houston area. So adaptive reuse is an important concept for us to understand the pros and the cons of. Innovations in building design, we're going to talk about some of the things that are available to us now that make for better buildings, faster construction, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the growth of Christian education. If there's one good thing that came out of COVID, it was awareness about where education had gone in this nation. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. Let's talk first, though, about community-centered design. For years, architects and churches built their buildings like fortresses. I made that comment a few minutes ago. They were cloistered. They were barrier-like. Load-bearing masonry walls was the style in a lot of communities. Big doors, almost, you could almost picture a drawbridge and a moat going out the front doors of these buildings. Punched openings in the wall that could be closed up. They were sort of there to protect the body of Christ, the believers. They weren't built to be an outreach-oriented type thing, whereas a community center was done differently. So I'll talk about a little bit of a comparison between the two. For years, churches evolved like the diagram on the left, what I would call a sequential type of layout. A sequential layout says we need a place to worship. We have an acre over here, and we've got a little space for some parking. We build that. After a period of time, people get tired of the children crying and disrupting the service, so they build a little children's wing, or they go down in the basement and they put the kids down in the basement for a while until they outgrow that, and then they go build the children's wing. and they buy the house across the street, and then they put the Family Life Center, or they put the Youth Center, or they put the administration wing, or the adult classrooms, and pretty soon you have these buildings that are incredibly maze-like buildings. I used to give tours all the time to building committees in my community to show them really good ideas, but there was one building I always took them to that was the worst building in the community, and said, we don't want to do this. Finally, the pastor caught on that I was bringing people to show them the building because it was a terrible building. He was like, why are you coming here all the time? I said, well, your circulation here is incredibly bad. How do you find people in this building? And he said, well, that is a problem. We bring them in the front door, and to get from A to E, they've got to go through B, C, and D, and then they don't find their way back. So they go out the back door and walk around the building to get to the front of the building again. That's the way they evolved. And it didn't matter, by the way. Why? Because people were not making decisions about where to go to church based on these external issues. They were making decisions about where to go to church based on what? Where they were raised, denominational, right? I was raised in this church. I moved to this community. I'm going to look for that denomination, and I'm going to that church. And then I'll figure out the path through the building eventually. Didn't matter. But today, people don't make decisions like that. They get online, and they start researching you. Have you attended to all of my needs yet? My children's needs. Is this building going to be usable for us? So they're researching things not just theologically, but they're researching, is the building safe and secure? When my kids were young, I've got a 40-year-old son now. When my kids were little, we got to church, opened the doors, boom, gone, out. I didn't see them for 3 hours unless I was teaching one of their classes. Well, parents don't think that way anymore. They think, they're shepherding kids and hurting them and relating to all of the people that are going to be in contact with them, their special needs, their special issues. I had a diabetic daughter. We did have to go in and tell the teacher, she's type 1 diabetic. If she starts acting goofy, let us know and we'll come get some sugar in her and so forth. But parents now think, I've got to let these teachers know about every little nuance of my child. Not just the security issues, but everything else. And so what's evolved is a different kind of building. And I'll make the comparison this way. Back in the 60s, I grew up in the Chicago area, and I learned to play basketball at the YMCA. So I would go to the Y, which was down the street from our house. And the old YMCAs were like these sequential churches. You would go in, there'd be a little tiny foyer space, like a church, a little narthex. There'd be a roll-up door. You would go in, you would pay the guy $2, and then you would go down this long hallway, and there'd be a sign that would say boys or men's locker room, and similar on the other side for the gals. You would go in, and then you would wind your way through the locker room, maybe through the shower room to get, you'd have to go through the showers to get there, dodging whoever's in the shower, and then you'd get to the racquetball court or the basketball court or the pool, whatever you were searching for. So it was sequentially laid out, very institutional, load-bearing walls, no changes in mind, because they couldn't change. You build load-bearing walls, and the cost to change sometimes precludes you from doing that, so you end up building new buildings, right? So what happened was in the 1980s, HOK Sports out of Kansas City, who was the world's largest sports planning architectural firm, known for doing the major stadiums around the world, had a fellow by the name of Craig Elliott. Craig worked for 4 years doing minor league ballparks, and then he was in the midst of a revolution in the change that the way communities were developing community centers. And he was developing community centers like the one on the right. So buildings that received you before you got to the building. Clear, identifiable front door, not 10 doors around the perimeter of the building. That you have to kind of find a door, weave your way through the building, and eventually maybe find the front of the building. But clear, identifiable front door, lots of glass, so you can see life inside the building. And then once you go inside the building, everything that community center had to offer was available to us visually. Not just the door to the locker room to the pool, but 10 feet high, 50 feet wide of glass into the pool room. You can see the kids playing. Now there's glass separating it, but you can see as if they're with you. Same with the gym, running track slicing through. concession stand, climbing wall, all of that was available visually to you. It was very stimulating and very exciting, and it was very enlivening. People could see it from the outside, and they're like, hey, I think I'll go in there and find the weight room, or I think I'll go in there and do whatever activity was attractive to them. That was the modern community center. Well, churches figured out that we can create church that way. So what's the advantage for a church to have a modern community center? That space, that receiving space, that central gathering space, that orange dot in the center is the space where you can receive people who finally get enough courage to come to the building and re-engage, maybe in church for the first time in a long time, or for the first time. And as Matt was pointing out earlier, the building doesn't do it. The building facilitates people who have a mindset to do it. If you create that space and invite people in, you better have people who are stationed whose gift is hospitality, or who are warm enough people. I did a church in Ames, Iowa. It was a large church, a couple thousand people, 950 of whom were college students. It's where Iowa State is. So this church was opening the doors to college students. And they put a woman at the core of this church, right in the greeting space, that was like everybody's mom. She was the perfect person for them to walk in the door and see mom. And if you've got a question, they came in and they would ask her. And I stood there. I was there checking thermostat issues one day, and like 3 weeks after they opened the building. And I'm looking at this unbelievable connector, this person who was perfectly placed to be the mom to these 950 kids. Now, not everybody needed to be guided through the building, but she was the person that was making everybody feel comfortable. And what facilitated that was this terrific space that was well lit, lots of natural lighting. It was just a really great, generous space where people were not getting in each other's ways, trying to shuffle through and squeeze through. And they had this person who was geared to be in the perfect spot in that space and be facilitated in her ministry the way that God intended her. So these kinds of spaces have become very important to churches. So when people come in, they see life inside the building, not punched openings and prison doors on the front. They go through, they're greeted, and they see everything. That's where I go check in for church, or that's where I go check my kids in, or that's where I go find a restroom, or there's the coffee bar, or there's, whatever you need is available to me off that. One of the challenges I have all the time, and the little story that Matt was telling about the church over in Colorado that made the phone call yesterday, was they have this old building, and the challenge is, how do you transition an older building? About 50% of our projects are trying to incorporate old buildings designed like the one on the left, the sequential layout, to turn them into this kind of community center style building. How do we do that? And there are ways to do that. Sometimes they're difficult. Sometimes it takes a little bit of doing, but there are ways to do that. So community center design is important. We're going to show a little video here. I'll make a few comments after John Calabrese gets done talking about their vision for this building in Harrison, Ohio.
Hi, my name is John, Associate Pastor at LifeSpring. I'm standing at the Community Commons. You might hear kids in the background, which we absolutely love. That was part of our vision here, a place to connect, play, and grow with our community. We wanted a place that people can come from all different walks of life to gather in one place for us to be the church. And that's what happens here. In partnership with BGW, Lionheart, and Weaver Construction, this place has come to life. Every day, Monday through Sunday, there are people in here, and we get to be the church. Some of the stories that we have seen and had here because of this type of ministry has been unbelievable. We've had 7 families baptized from Lionheart, families who have come in to be part of a preschool, the academy, and in partnership with their community director and our children's ministry, we've started to see families integrating into the life of the church, and in doing so, into the life of Christ. One such story is Johnny. Johnny came in as a Lionheart dad with his 2 kids. We started to build a relationship with Johnny and seeing him more and more on the weekends. And in time, Johnny joined a discipleship group, and from that discipleship group, he was baptized. His whole life has been changed. He's now serving in the tech team, He's now leading his own small group here at LifeSpring. What an incredible story of partnership of Lionheart, LifeSpring, the children's ministry, all working together. So
Okay, I'm going to stop the video there because I'm running a little long on time, but you heard it, you could see the excitement in John Calabrese's face there. You know, he sees the connection between inviting people in from the community in their pre-K and connecting them to people in the church. They've got a community commons space. That's what they call their building, by the way, is community commons. They don't call it what the name of the church was prior to that. So people feel the comfort to be able to come to a building that they feel part of before they even get there. And they come into that building, and they're very intentional about being in their path. They're very intentional about passing out a coupon, not just for a cup of Mrs. Folgers, but a nice latte or a barista-style drink where they can come in and sit down, and somebody like John or some of the other people will come up and say, I haven't seen you before. My name is such and such, and they form a connection, which in some cases falls flat. In other cases leads to counseling situations. They've got a church that's full of counselors, and in other situations just a simple invitation to come and join with them in worship on the weekends. And so they've been very intentional. And at the same time, and Matt's going to talk a little bit about this in our next session, that their motivation, one of their motivations behind the pre-K is financial too, which we'll get into in just a minute. Mixed use developments. This is a project down in Alabama. Oh, sorry, this is Boulder, Colorado. Yeah, gosh, I did the design for this project and I forgot all about it. Yeah, Boulder, Colorado. This building, by the way, was largely designed with the combined assistance of local community leaders. So they invited people to come in and ask them, what are the things that you need in this building that we're about ready to renovate? That's 1 block from Pearl Street, the main street in Boulder, Colorado. Tons of pedestrians. What do you want out of this building? Because we want to open it up. And they started talking about gymnasium space and community gathering spaces, affordable housing. There's a building that you'll see in this little video sequence in the background. They did a 4-story building that's under construction right now for affordable housing, job training, rooftop space that they could lease out. All of that kind of thing came into play in this building. You can see the building to the left there in the background. That's the 4-story residential building, the lower level of which is all retail space that they lease out. So they got a development group involved to help afford this. The development group is footing the bill for it. They're providing the land. They're receiving some of the income for the land lease. And then the development group is actually building the building, and that's affording them the ability to go in and do their project. Very unique, not appropriate for all conditions, but for their community, this was a good answer to infusing themselves into the community. Community Hope Center, this is down in Sanford, Florida. This is a project where they're tied to a number of different churches in the Orlando area. They're basically a food distribution center. And they also have a series of buildings across the street from this that they've opened up for church planting. So they've got this food distribution center. They accept products in, provide low-cost food, clothing, counseling, so on and so forth for the community in Sanford, Florida. This is a project in Valparaiso, Indiana for the Sunshine Group, Sunshine Community Center, a local church that is serving special needs students. We see not just big facilities like this, that's a large facility based on the needs of a large community of individuals that are special needs folks, but we see it on the micro level too. A small church in Tucson that opened up a couple of rooms. They had a couple of people involved in their church who were trained autism specialists, and they thought, well, maybe there's a need in our community. People that have autistic children don't go to church. They can't, because there's nobody there that has the ability to care for their child if they have, a certain level of autism. So they opened it up. These autism specialists made themselves available. Almost immediately, 25 families joined the church from the local community because they had options for these children. So the one that we're doing in Belton right now, are you guys from Belton? The one that we're doing for First Baptist Church in Belton has 4 classrooms dedicated to special needs folks in that church because they've got people in the church whose ministry gift is to attending to the needs of those kids. So this can happen at a lot of different levels, and the parents are super grateful to finally get a little relief and connection to other parents. This is something that really works for them. Performing arts centers, we've done a number of performing arts centers. The one on the lower left here, Well, actually, this whole sheet is dedicated to one in Escondido, California for the New Vintage Church. This is a group that restored a 600-seat theater. They did a public-private partnership. The public side didn't provide any funding, but they steamrolled this through a process that normally takes 2 years and got it done in a very short period of time to get this theater up and going, and connected the church to 9 different arts groups that have agreed to use this building, aside from the time that the church needs it, which is 1 night a week and on Sundays. So they've come up with this plan, and they've put 19,000 square feet of classrooms that are now opened up to the community to be able to use as well. Co-working space, this is a project in our hometown in Salt Lake City, 19,000 square feet. The person that developed this project is a pastor from Atlanta that came to plant a church and decided he would create for-profit space that had a room about this size for 150 people to have training in for their business, but it is actually a church planting space, and he's planted 2 churches out of the salt mine. So they come in and they utilize that space, and the rest of the week it's a for-profit center. You can see this is actual footage of the finished product. Cool space, some of which doesn't need to be used by the church, but the 2 large classroom spaces and the big training room are used every week by the church. And then they grow, and then they get kicked out, so they can get a new group in. So that church that was first planted 4 years ago has now moved on to a different space.
We're celebrating our 3-year anniversary here at Salt Mine Productive Workspace.
So another concept that we're seeing more taking advantage of is merging indoor and outdoor space, blurring the line between bringing outdoors and indoors together through the use of different kinds of tools. Again, it doesn't work in every climate. I'm doing a project in Fargo, North Dakota, and they just loved the idea of, I said, you guys are not in San Diego. We're not going to be doing that up here. But there are ways to position buildings, too, to take advantage of outdoor space. They said, you know, if you can position the front door of the building to the south side, it's actually, you know, when it warms up here to 20 degrees, you know, we can take advantage of no wind and access to sun. So they thought about it and thought, well, maybe we can try this and see how this works. And so, but that's not the case for all climates, but for a lot of climates, that blurring that line, and you can see this project down in Escondido, the way that the roof overhang extends out. So you're outdoors, and then you're semi-indoors, and then with those doors rolled up, then you merge into the building and you're part of that space. So it gives the perception of a much broader, bigger space when you do this kinds of gymnastics to be able to make the building work. You can see various renditions of that. Glass you have to use carefully. Glass is expensive. If you're not careful about the way you use glass, if you face glass in the wrong way, you can incur all kinds of unintended costs for the glass, for the heat gain or the heat loss or whatever it happens to be. So you have to be careful. But glass and glass products have advanced so remarkably in my career that what used to be just a real losing bargain using glass in some situations, now the coatings that they have and the kinds of things that are available for glass products are so much better. So you can do things differently than in the early part of my career. Adaptive reuse. Our first thing oftentimes is checking out whether or not there are available buildings to be able to convert. We've done 4 or 5 grocery store conversions. We've done 4 car dealership conversions. We converted a Lowe's store into a large church in south of Atlanta, 20 miles south of Atlanta. They make for good space if you are, again, careful about the way that you analyze the building to begin with. Not all buildings make great churches. Some buildings are destined to be torn down. They just need to be eliminated. But there are a lot of good products, or a lot of good projects that can come out of making use of that existing space. Sometimes, like the Lowe's store was a good example of this. Lowe's had probably $4.5 million worth of site development costs that was just kept up so well that they didn't have to spend money on. I got into this discussion a little bit earlier in my talk today that if you can avoid site work, people don't like to give money to site work. It's no fun giving your funds to laying sewer pipe for water dispersion. People like to give money to worship space or to children's space or to the kinds of spaces that are direct applications to ministry. And sewer pipe just isn't that fun. So if we can get some of those things taken care of in an adaptive reuse project, because it's already in, let's go that direction. So grocery stores make for great things. Office buildings too. This is a church that in the last recession in 2009 went in and purchased an office building for 10 cents on the dollar in the Brea, California area. An evangelical free church that went in there and bought 50,000 square feet for a tenth of what it would cost them to have built that building. Now there are challenges with that. Office buildings have columns every 30 to 35 feet, so you got to deal with that. That worked well for them when they were a church of 150 people. Now that they've grown, they ended up having to add a 750-seat room inside an L-shaped portion of the exterior of the building. But they did that 7 years into their thing and turned out to be a terrific addition. And they're now in a building that's 70,000 square feet for a small fraction of what it would have cost them to go in and develop that building as a new building. Retail big boxes too are another terrific place. This is actually the Lowe's store. This is just before they opened up the building. The center space there, the center photograph there, is a worship space for 1,800, and they didn't have the head height to be able to accommodate, so we actually hired a company to go in and remove the columns, reinforce the steel, and raise the roof on jacks 7 feet in the air. But again, it was far cheaper than having to go out and recreate that space. This building over in Ohio, in the east side of Ohio near Akron, was one of the worst buildings I have ever seen in my life. I thought, my gosh, what are we going to do with this building? But through some creative rethinking about the front of the building, it was totally reinvented. It was a family fun center that was turned into a viable, wonderful church building, a building, a collection of odd spaces that they put together and really turned it into, they actually kept the putt-putt golf course. When you go into church, there are a rack of putters and balls right there, and the kids will go back and play until their time comes to go into class and so forth, but they were able to salvage that portion of the fun center. Auto dealerships make for great churches. They always have big showrooms, lots of glass, and tons of parking, and so the site development work is really good, and so we've done 4 of those conversions. Okay, let's turn our attention to innovations in building systems. This Hercutech product is a product that we've been introduced. It does have limitations. It has ICBO, International Council of Building Officials, is an organization that does testing for products. That is important to get your testing taken care of. They're allowed to go to 14 feet, so it's an excellent product for schools. It doesn't work for all walls in churches yet, but a portion of churches, we've done a couple of churches that have used this product. I'm going to let the reporter talk a little bit about this.
The way it's being built is the first of its kind.
Fox 10's Dominique Newland went to check it out.
The walls are going up at Northwest Christian School in Phoenix, Arizona's first school built without wood. You heard that correctly. Crews installing a wood substitute, Hercule. And just like Hercules, it's strong.
That's the whole purpose behind the name. It's a very strong wall system, especially when we look at the typical products we compete against.
Tempe-based manufacturer Hercutech is behind the project. The walls are made of steel, styrofoam, and an interlocking device.
The energy efficiency side of it, the cleaner, healthier living, with that airtight wall system, there's less dust. And then because we are concrete, steel, and EPS, there's no food for mold or mildew or termites. So it just creates a healthier structure.
Across from the construction site is Northwest Community Church, which used Hercule last year for their new children's ministry. Officials overseeing the project say going this route was not only cost-effective, but eco-friendly.
Weighing the different options between steel, between wood framing, the benefits that we gain from the insulation value with the Hercule, with the energy efficiency, it just checked a little bit more boxes than just traditional framing.
Hercule is fire and disaster resistant and deter mold, moisture, and insects. The projected finished date of Northwest Christian School is slated for August of 2024, right in time for the start of a brand new school year. For Fox 10 News, I'm Dominique Newland.
Yeah, cool. For that time and place, it made all kinds of sense. And one of the reasons we bring builders into this conversation early on, like SB, is because it's important for us to be able to have conversations about those kinds of topics before we get too far into design. Dean Schiffer with Schiffer Built is our general contractor in the Arizona area. Dean did 7 different studies or 7 different analysis on different wall systems, and early on, when masonry was a lot cheaper there, it didn't make a lot of sense 10 years ago, but suddenly there's no masonry contractors available anymore, and their prices went out of sight. Hercutech stayed the same, and they came into the market region that it made a lot of sense. So those things shift over time. Next year, masonry maybe comes down. Maybe Hercutech starts to make an impact in that particular market area, and all of a sudden it makes sense for us to go back to masonry. So having a builder involved for us is critically important to understand what current costs are for different structural systems that we're going to build the building out of, because we need to make those decisions early as we are counting the cost of the building. That's important for us to understand. We like design build structural systems. If we're going to do a standard frame building, we like, instead of the architect traditionally 99% of the time going out and hiring an independent structural engineer, we like hiring design build companies to do this. Why? Because structural engineers will almost always way over design the building. 40% of the projects we work on have been designed by another group already. A lot of those groups that finish up a project, we inherit the drawings, a complete set of drawings. And the very first thing that we do when we inherit those drawings is I send the drawings to Steve to look at the site work. And because Steve and I have been on a number of calls where you have been trying to rescue a project looking at the site work, and we will start looking at structural, mechanical, electrical. That's almost always where things go bust. And a lot of times we'll find, so the code makes you design to a certain bending strength for your beams and your structural components in the building, and then they apply in the code a 100% factor of safety, just in case there's something that they can't account for. Well, then the structural engineers will inherit it and put another 100% on the 100%, which now means that the structures are designed to 400% of what it actually takes to hold up the roof. And if we go in and do a structural analysis, we oftentimes find we don't need to change anything other than get a different structural engineer to take a look at this, because they've way over designed it. They are by nature conservative. That's the way structural engineers are built, to be conservative. And that's good. You want a safe building, right? But building a building that crosses that line that goes to 400% is just not in a good stewardship position. So for us, getting design build where you're putting the designer in a competitive situation with the fabricator, now all of a sudden they're thinking lean and mean. And so we've been able to work with folks like GEM or 6 States or Nucor or some of the other ones around the nation to be able to come up with much leaner, meaner buildings that are still designed 100% beyond what the code requires you to do. So we like this approach to things. Lindab ductwork, we learned this from subcontractors. In my second session, I'm going to talk about integrating subcontracting into the process of design and how that works. But we had a fellow come to us a number of years ago and say, the way that conventional ductwork occurs above this ceiling that feeds these diffusers that you see around the room is typically L-shaped pieces of ductwork that come out. They get flipped, inverted, and turned into a duct, or there's spiral ductwork, and then when they seam those ducts together, or they join a branch to that duct, then they put a plasticizing agent around that seam. They used to use duct tape. People don't use duct tape for ducts anymore. What do they use duct tape for? Prom dresses. Yes, prom dresses. You see people all the time building their prom suit and their prom dress out of duct tape. That's what it's good for. But now they use plasticizing agents, and you put it up, so down here, whatever the temperature is, 70 degrees, up there on a hot summer day is probably 130 to 140 degrees. And those plasticizing agents become brittle and they crack, and over the life of a building, you'll lose about 20% of the static pressure in that duct to that space. It's not making its way down here, so you're having to energize the space. And as an owner, you're thinking, gosh, energy is getting expensive. Yes, it is. Energy has gotten more expensive. And by the way, you're losing 20% of your energy input into that space above. This ductwork system has a neoprene seal on it. And that neoprene seal doesn't degrade in high temperature environments, so you're not losing static pressure over the life of the building. The disadvantage of it is that ductwork system, that binding system that holds together, is about 40% more in cost than standard ductwork. But the secret to the sauce is the fact that it goes in half the time. And if the subcontractors understand how quickly they can erect this, you'll make up in labor what you pay for in product. So we learned that from a sub. The sub said, yeah, it's a lot more expensive, but we put it in half the time. So I went out to the Northlands project that we did over in Orlando one afternoon and watched these guys, two guys, sit there and fit together 40-foot long with 6 branches on it for an office area and lift it up in less than half an hour. That would have taken somebody all day long to do in using conventional ductwork, because it just seams together, screws together, boom, lift it up on ladders and clip it into place. LockDot's adhesive system. This is cool because in the last number of years, last few years, the cities will not let you put your finished floor products down that require adhesive unless the moisture content of the concrete has cured to a certain level. And that's hard, because if there's moisture coming up from the soil down below, which there almost always is, it takes months for that to become viable, to be able to allow them to release. They'll ask you, show me your test reports on the concrete. And they'll go out, they'll drill a little core sample, and they'll do a moisture test on that piece of concrete. Nope, you're not putting in your floor yet. In Riva Trace, Maryland, I waited 6 months after the completion of the building before we were allowed to put carpet and flooring products down. LockDots allows us to go in almost immediately, and it's very user-friendly. Now, if there's one person who knows how to use this product, he can teach the rest of the church how to lay their own carpet, and they can save $4 a square foot on doing that kind of thing. You can see he just kind of uses this tool to lay it across and stick it down. And then, if you need to change it, or somebody spills coffee on it, which inevitably happens, then you can pull it right back up again. Plasma air is another thing that we've learned from a subcontractor. In 1991, ASHRAE, Association of Sheet Metal Manufacturers, who write the codes that get adopted, said we need 15 cubic feet per minute per occupant. So 15 cubic feet of fresh air incorporated into the building. So a room like this, that today we have, 35, 40 people in here, on a post on the outside that probably has an occupancy of 200 people in this room or 150 people in this room, times 15 cubic feet per minute of air that's infused into the space, drawn out through the return air ducts, and then evacuated from the building. Why? Because we're trying to replace the CO2 that we're exhaling with oxygen so that we don't get sleepy, and I don't know what they thought was going to happen. We were going to all keel over, but anyway, it was done for health reasons, and that's good. We like to have healthy buildings, right? The problem is that you're paying a whole lot more for energy, whereas a plasma air unit changes the molecular structure in the ductwork from a CO2 to an oxygen molecule. It's $1,200 to put in. It's an expensive little device, but over the long haul, it saves you a ton of money because you're not having to evacuate near as much air out of the building. And when you put your unit in, let's say that this room and the room across from it require a 25-ton unit. Now all of a sudden, you can put 20 tons in. You can drop 20% out of your tonnage, and at $5,000 a ton, you're saving $25,000 because of that $1,200 unit. And you still get the benefits of the oxygen that we were after in the first place. We used to have to bring it in and do demonstrations for the code officials. They get it now. Most of them have heard about it and will put it in. Very seldom, though, can we get the mechanical engineers to do it. Why? Because their contracts are structured on the more money that's put into the mechanical system, the more money they make. So as architects, we have to go in and say, no, we're not doing it that way. We're going to do it this way because it saves so much money in the long run. I'm not going to go through the smoke test. Okay, let's talk finally about the growth of Christian education and the importance of that. Our company was founded because we needed a Christian school in our community. My partner at the time, Dan Cook, took a year off of his practice as an architect. He is a general contractor as well, and got 42,000 square feet going. So our origins come out of the need for Christian education in our communities. So we are thrilled for what COVID did to us. We're very happy. We'll talk about the importance of developing affordable athletic space and how that can be done. performing arts spaces that can be brought online that are good for the school but also good for the community, and what are the kinds of things that we need to do in order to make them community efficient. Classroom and lab space is another thing that we emphasize. Lobbies and common spaces that can be used. We're doing one right now down in Fort Lauderdale that is a space that they want to use their theater space for the school as a church planting site. So we have a 500-seat room and a lobby space next to it that we have to strategically position to avoid that becoming part of the secure area for the school. And certainly we want to offer affordable conceptual design. So I'm going to spend some time in our second session talking about our conceptual design process, which I have alluded to, the charrette process, which is a very efficient way to go about getting conceptual design taken care of.